นะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะ นะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะพุทธังธัมมังสังฆังกุณุตรังอุปัชฌายังนัมมาสามิ We can divide the Buddha's teachings into two main categories. The first category consists of a presentation, an explanation, a revelation of the way things are, specifically or particularly the way the body, human mind work, the way they influence each other, the causes of suffering, the causes, conditions leading to freedom, suffering. So these are statements presented in many cases in hypothesis about the nature of reality that we can experience as human beings. The second category of teachings are the practical application of the knowledge, understanding that are gained from the first category. So given that such and such a phenomena exists, is true, then what is the wisest way to practice, to receive, to deal with that particular phenomena? So in Pali, this is the Majjhena Dhammatisana and the Majjhima Patipatha. So to give you an example, it's it's a pattern that once you've recognized it, you'll find appearing again and again, which the Buddha makes a statement about the way things are, and then recommends a practice appropriate to it. So in the very last teaching, the Buddha gave the Pajjimawada before he entered Nibbana, final Nibbana. Buddha reminds us that all sankharas or conditioned phenomena fall apart, nothing's permanent, and then he gives us the advice that being so, then you should perfect yourself in or cultivate heedfulness. So heedfulness is not a common word these days, is it? But it's really we can translate as saying non-separation from mindfulness, being ready for whatever life throws at us, a sense of alertness and readiness to deal with the changes and the um, the predictable changes, the unpredictable changes, the slow, gradual, the sudden, unexpected changes which constitute our life. So this is the pattern. The Buddha says, this is the way things are. This is the widest way to deal with it. So in some ways we can compare that first category of teachings to science. It's not exactly comparable to pure science in that the things the Buddha taught us, or the revelations, the sharing of the things that the Buddha discovered, was not complete. And in the famous example in the suttas, where the Buddha picks up a handful of leaves and asks disciples, which is most, the number of leaves in my hand or the number of leaves in the forest, and the disciples, probably a bit relieved that this is one of the easier questions that they would be confronted with by the Buddha, said, well, the number of leaves in the forest is far more. And the Buddha said, similarly, the things that I've discovered and realized are innumerable, like the leaves in the forest. But the things that I'm teaching you are really quite few. They're comparable to the number of leaves in my hand. So the Buddha had already filtered and chosen amongst all the things that he'd realized, and selected those things that were necessary for liberation from dukkha. Now the second category of the Buddha's teachings, the practical application of that knowledge, I would suggest is comparable to technology, in that the dictionary definition of technology is not confined to inventions and material objects like phones and computers and so on, but also refers to principles and processes and techniques. And of course the word technique, technical, there's the same root as technology. So I think that this is the defining characteristic, or the unique characteristic of Buddha Dhamma, is that it has a very sophisticated technology to educate the human heart and to lead us out of dukkha, and to teach us how to abandon the causes of dukkha. So my own, admittedly superficial observations of many faith-based religions is that they offer inspiring ideals and tell us how we should be, how a good person should be. And yet, when we ask, well, how do we become that kind of person? We're not that kind of person right now. We'd like to be, but how can we change ourselves? What do we have to do? And there I think there's a big hole in those religious teachings, and one which Buddha Dhamma excels in specific, practical techniques based upon a clear appreciation of the way things are. The Eightfold Path, or as it is abbreviated to the Threefold Training, is we may call a holistic education of the whole human being, of our conduct, of our heart, and of the wisdom, the way that we understand, the way that we look at the world. There is a tendency to consider this as a process of stages in which one first establishes oneself in good conduct, and then on the basis of that develops meditation, calms, stills, clarifies, stabilizes the mind, and then from there moves on to development of wisdom. But when we get down to the practice itself, we see it every stage of the practice is one in which we need to be utilizing elements from the training of conduct, the training of the heart, the training in wisdom. To give a simple example, to keep the precepts in the way in which the training in sila is taught by the Buddha requires us to understand clearly the suffering involved in not keeping each of the precepts, the value, the advantages, we call the anisong of keeping each of the precepts. Because a defining factor of sila in Buddha Dhamma is that it's voluntary. If someone were to abstain from killing and stealing and sexual misconduct and so on, simply out of desire to avoid punishment or out of a desire for some reward, then it would not be considered sila in the Buddhist sense. Of course, living in such a way would be wholesome and better than not keeping those precepts or those commandments, whatever. But it would not have the transformative effect. It would not provide the supportive conditions for further development on the path, as long as it lacks that real sense of voluntary commitment. So a certain level of wisdom is necessary before one can even begin to keep the precepts. In fact, we may even say that sila is a measure of wisdom, in that if we really understand, penetrated the law of karma, then there's no way we would break any of those precepts. So if we really understood what leads to growth and to true happiness in life and what leads to suffering, accumulation of its causes, then our commitment to precepts would be rock solid. So keeping precepts is not a preliminary practice. It depends upon a certain level of wisdom and insight, and is in itself, the commitment to precepts is a test of one's understanding and maturity. But in order to keep the precepts, we also need this training of the heart. I think in particular in three areas: an area of mindfulness, in khanti, or forbearance, patient endurance, and in metta, or loving kindness. And because without mindfulness, then when there is a trigger or some stimulus, some pressure or some temptation, then our good intentions can be swept away. And it's mindfulness which allows us to have that clarity and sensitivity to what's going on right now in our body and mind, which detects the arising of some unwholesome thought or a stimulus which tends to lead to a train of unwholesome thoughts, and can cut it off at source. But on occasions when there is mindfulness of unwholesome intention, but if there's a lack of patience, then after a while the mind will just follow its old habits. The more that one cultivates systematically, consistently, thoughts of kindness and compassion, then the less likely it is that thoughts of harming and thoughts of transgressing the precepts will arise. So the training of the heart and the training of conduct are intimately connected. With the voluntary commitment to precepts, then a sense of self-respect arises naturally when we've been through experiences where we've been pressured to break precepts, transgress precepts, or tempted, and yet we've been able to maintain our precepts to the extent that at night time, before sleeping, we review our sila, and we are able to confirm that there is nothing that we've said or done today that we feel that we could criticize ourselves for or feel ashamed of. And similarly, or even more powerfully, that there's nothing that we've said or done today that even our teachers, those with pure heart and intention, if they were to know everything we said and done today, they would have no words of criticism for us at all. And if you can look back on your actions and your speech over a day and be able to say, yes, there's nothing that I feel I could criticize myself for, nothing that even my teacher and those of pure mind would look down on, there's a great sense of joy arises. And that joy can be foundation for samadhi, wisdom. So precepts not just giving up stuff or not doing things you want to do, but when approaching the precepts as a cultivation, a training of conduct, and being able to sustain that commitment throughout the day and all the things that happen in the day that can take us away from the Dhamma, then this sense of pomoja, which Ajahn Kovilo is very interested in and has written about, arises with the precepts as foundation. And keeping the precepts in such a way makes you like yourself a lot more, makes you quite content to be by yourself, enjoy your own company. And that sense of self-respect and enjoying your own company and wishing yourself well, being a friend to yourself, these are qualities which contribute to the training of the heart. So this is the way that, as I said, the cultivation of mindfulness and patience and loving kindness support the practice of sila, and the practice of sila supports the training of the heart. Because if you observe the kinds of distracting thoughts that arise in the mind and the anxieties and so on, so much is based upon things you said and done, or didn't say and do and feel you should have done, or other people said. How much of it is sila-based or lack of sila-based? So a sort of impeccable standard of sila is reducing, the raw material for mental confusion and distress considerably. So it's clearing out the mind, so much junk and clutter. But in training the mind, then we can see also that wisdom, faculty, is always necessary, or at least on the level, very basic level of sampajanya. The sampajanya is so closely allied to sati that in many cases the Buddha doesn't separate them. And when he uses the word sati and sampajanya is not mentioned, you can just assume that it's implied in the word sati, because there can't be any real sati without sampajanya. At least if one is to cultivate the past correctly. The example of miccha sati or wrong sati, let's say sati which lacks sampajanya, which example I've been relating for many years now, comes from time when I was living at Wat Nanachat, and there was a number of monks who were learning the Patimokkha recitation, which is quite a feat of memory. It takes most monks 2, 3, 4 months at least of daily chanting, daily memorization and revision. And one monk was particularly diligent, and after the evening meeting, he would go back to his kuti, his little hut in the forest, and chant the Patimokkha. So he was very mindful of all the words in the Patimokkha, very much in the present moment, very devoted to his practice. But because the kuti's the windows were open, and the sound of his chanting was disturbing the other monks who were either meditating or wanting to go to sleep, and I started to get complaints. So the fault of the monk was not his mindfulness of the Pali verses, the Pali chanting, but of the bigger picture and the context within which he was practicing mindfulness. So that's some indication or meaning of sampajanya. So it's a very basic level of wisdom. But in the practice of mindfulness, then, or the development of samadhi, then it is possible for some people to kind of steamroller the defilements, but it's not it's not an approach that leads to wisdom, so that it's can say it's not really the threefold training, in that the samadhi, just as the sila that we're trying to cultivate, is that sila which leads to samadhi and panya. And that samadhi that we're trying to develop, samma samadhi, is that which is based upon sila and leads to wisdom. So you can see in many meditators who have a powerful mind, that they can steamroller and just sort of blast obstacles out of their path. But that becomes their kind of default way of dealing with life. Just feel obstacles and people, things, is sort of like, get out of my way. Don't disturb me. Don't mess with my meditation. And so a lack of interest and curiosity, and a lack of this learning, this devotion to learning, which I feel is at the heart of the Buddha's path, where we are essentially learners. We're learning the way. So that we call samatha mind, one in which just sort of blasting, blocking, steamrolling obstacles. For those who are not very good at it, it's immensely frustrating, and for those that are good at it, it's a dead end. So I think that using wisdom faculty is very important in meditation. That can be with the use of particular skillful reflections. One that I've been talking about recently is, if you're a busy day, you're going to have probably a kind of busy mind, and to sit down and expect the busy mind just to disappear because it's your time for your meditation. It's not likely, maybe, if you're very skilled. But sometimes when there is a momentum of thought in the mind, it's more skillful to channel that energy than to oppose it. And in such a case, you can use a more discursive meditation. And one that I suggest is to Thai lay supporters, is to imagine that you're going to prepare a meal for the Buddha and his enlightened disciples. Imagine that you get up early in the morning, and just imagine with what care and attention and love you would prepare the food and cook the food. And imagine traveling from your home to the forest or the mountain where the Buddha is residing, and imagine crawling into a cave or into the presence of the Buddha and offering the food into his hands or putting the food into his bowl. And so using the discursive mind, using imagination in a disciplined way, focused way, but channeling that energy of thought in such a way that after a while it dissolves into joy and bliss, which again are foundations for samadhi. So if thinking is on a wholesome object, a wholesome theme, and you can maintain the mind on a wholesome theme, then the agitation of thinking falls away. And then after a while, the thinking itself kind of runs out of steam. And as the joy of the meditation becomes stronger. This is a way of using wisdom and choosing the correct and the most effective, skillful means of dealing with hindrances. I once was sitting with one of the great monks of 20th century Thailand, Ajahn Buddhadasa, and a layperson asked him, what can I do about agitation? My mind is so agitated. And he said, in his inimitable way, he says, so stop agitating it. Yes, because then we think we're the victim. This agitation is something that happens to us. But with all the hindrances, there has to be some assent to the hindrance, some pleasure in the hindrance. Otherwise, the hindrance would fall away. And we need to recognize that. So agitation is, to a certain extent, something that you are doing to your mind, not something that's happening to your mind. So Ajahn Buddhadasa's advice simply is stop doing that. You don't need to do it. But that's, I'm sure you're all thinking, well, that's easier said than done. My own advice is that if we look at the Satipatthana Sutta, the section on the Cittanupassana Satipatthana, then the Buddha is counseling us to be aware of when the mind is with greed, when the mind is with aversion, when the mind is with delusion. So when the mind is with this and with that, both wholesome and unwholesome, and when it's not. But I think this is a really important point, that when your mind is agitated, then it's not actually, it's the mind with agitation. So there's the mind and there's agitation. The mind is with agitation. It's not that the mind is agitated. So if you can recognize that and just shift the focus from the agitation to the mind that is with agitation, then the agitation will fall away. I have a simile for this, and that is of some children playing, being naughty in a sort of a dark place under the stairs or something like that. And then the parent opens the door, turns on the light, but instead of shooing the children out and telling them off, the parent just stands there and says, carry on playing. The light's on brightly, the adult is standing there watching without judgment, but it's clearly there, and I think the children would stop playing. I would if it was me. So the analogy here is that shifting from the content and what's going on and trying to stop it, or just feeling pulled along by it, but just turning on the light and to focus on the mind, which is with agitation, and the agitation falls away because there's no assent to it, there's no consent to it, there's no opposition to it. There's just the thinking falls away. So that's one one practical means of dealing with agitation. Another is mental activity is usually a mixture of images and words. Sometimes the images are predominant, sometimes the words, sometimes just images, sometimes just words. So that's another kind of observation and exactly the constitution of the agitation. But in the case that there are words involved, and usually there are, one technique that I've found in the Tibetan tradition, which I think is very helpful, is to imagine the words that are coursing through your brain as being written in water, as being scribed on the surface of the water. So this is why this is such a skillful means is you don't intentionally try to stop the thought, but because you know to what happens with words written in water, then your brain just does it for you, and they dissolve without any sense of forcing the mind. Another method is just to catch the last few words of the sentence that's appearing in your brain, in your head. Say, and then we can go and have a cup of coffee, and then you realize what's going on. That's the sampajanya. When you realize that what you're thinking about is not really what you're intended to be focused upon. And then instead of trying to stop yourself thinking that, you consciously repeat it. So, and then I'm going to have a cup of coffee, and then I'll 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 have a cup of coffee. And what happens? You just get bored and you stop. So rather than pushing against it, so I don't want to be thinking about that, just get out of my head. You just go along with it and just repeat those last few words again and again and again, and very soon you stop. And just one other variation on that is just to add a short summary of like a Dhamma reflection on the end. And then I'll go and have a copy, and it's all impermanent. And then I'll go and do this, and it's all impermanent. So just using a word like impermanent or not self or something like this, or it's just an empty, whatever word you like, but something that just rounds off that stream of thought in a way that you feel this sense of completion, or to use a more modern word, closure, some closure. We're using sort of ending the thought, ending the sentence, ending that stream of thinking in a way that feels, I can put that down now, come back to the breath, or come back to the object. Just now I was talking about this kind of samatha mind, which is just a little bit too abrupt and just cut stuff off and come back, because often there's one part of you that doesn't want to do that, and is hankering to return to that again. So if you're not careful, before long you find yourself returning to that kind of thought or imagination which is sort of rudely cut off. So you want to be abandoning distraction wholeheartedly, and you really want to come back to the breath. And so labeling, that's a little act of labeling. When you realize your mind is caught up with a memory or some kind of imagination, then just labeling that as pointless, worthless, empty, dead end, whatever. Just find some short label just to remind yourself that that distraction, even though maybe have some pleasure in it, that it leads nowhere. You've been hanging out with thoughts like that for how many lifetimes, and where's it ever got you? So the Ajahn Chah said there's everything just goes on and on and on in one way or another except the Dhamma, which has a conclusion. So I mentioned with the hindrances, there is one part of us that assents to or consents to that hindrance. And there is a certain amount of pleasure in a thought and in a memory and in a fantasy. And to let go of the hindrance efficiently, you have to not just let go of like the content of it, but the feeling that it gives you. Because if you still crave that, hanker after that feeling, then before long, the mind will go back there again. So it's creating this interest and chanda, wholesome desire for the path and for treading the path. And realizing to what extent that we are falling away from that and falling away from our values and our aspirations every time we indulge in the feelings that we can so easily experience through memory and imagination. So they do give us a pleasure, but this is the path of wisdom is one in which we're willing to forego and to sacrifice small, trivial pleasures in order to realize deeper, more fulfilling happiness. So when we so the path of samadhi is one of stabilizing the mind, clarifying the mind, creating within it sense of solidity. So it's difficult to talk about, isn't it? Because you have at the same time this sense of rock solid, absolutely immovable, mountain-like solidity, and at the same time a flexibility and a softness and a gentleness. And these things would appear to be in opposition, certainly if you were to write them down on a piece of paper. But experientially, then these things coexist, and there's great sense of joy and sort of correctness and in the mind. You look this, yeah. This is the normal. This feels normal. It doesn't feel like exotic and mystical. It feels like, yeah, this is the normal state of the mind when it's just abandons all that junk and clutter and just comes back to its home base, as it were. So the difficulty about developing wisdom and insight into three characteristics is that we have a deeply conditioned tendency, habit of reacting to phenomena, either with a movement towards or a movement away. And that movement towards can be the slightest kind of quiver in the mind and slightest kind of retreat, very, very subtle. But as long as there is that reaction to phenomena, then the insight into three characteristics can't take place. So this is why samadhi is so important, that it anesthetizes that reaction, at least temporarily, and allows a clear experience and authentic experience of three characteristics as they're manifesting in body and mind. So this is the Buddha's technology it's not just saying, you should be peaceful and calm, you should be mindful, you should be this, you should be that, you shouldn't be like this, you shouldn't be like that. If you're like that, you're a bad person. If you're like this, you're a good person. But the Buddha is giving us this incredibly detailed, technical information at every stage of the path. If you do this, you need to be aware of this. You also need this, and this quality is connected to that quality, and then when they develop, they'll lead on to this. And so this is the the contribution that Buddhism's made to the world. It's not a belief system, but it's providing a tried and tested, extremely sophisticated technology for creating real substantial changes in the quality of life for human beings and communities. There's something that has to be applied. So again, to make a comparison with the faith-based systems, belief systems, then faith is more or less it ends in itself. That's to say, you have a choice. You either believe or you don't. That's it. Whereas in Buddhism, it's not that we are without sattha or faith. Faith's probably not the best translation. We don't really have one. There is an element of trust in it and confidence, faith, confidence, trust. But the articles of faith in Buddha Dhamma are statements about the way things are, the way life is, the way our bodies are, the way our minds are, what leads to progress, what leads to regress, what leads to an increase of suffering, what leads to a decrease of suffering. So as Buddhists, if we take these teachings on faith, meaning that we are not as yet capable of proving whether or not they're true. But it doesn't just stop at that acceptance, because they are statements that can be put to the test and should and must be put to the test. That the criteria or how we know whether or not our faith has been firmly established in Buddha Dhamma is how we live our lives, how we act, how we speak, how we spend our time. And because the Buddha's teachings are a challenge to us, the Buddha is saying that human beings can realize full liberation through this technology, through this training. You can abandon all that is unwholesome. You can develop the wholesome. You can purify your heart. And in fact, on one occasion, the Buddha said, I teach you to abandon the unwholesome because it is something you can do. If you couldn't do it, I wouldn't teach it. You can develop the wholesome. If you couldn't, I wouldn't teach it. This is really, really clear admonition, words of encouragement from the Buddha. You can do this. So if we have an authentic confidence and faith in, we have to put it into practice. So this is how we define ourselves as Buddhists, not by the intensity and strength of our faith, but to what extent we're willing to put what we believe to the test of proving it in our daily life. Yeah, okay. Can I abandon the unwholesome? Can I use the Buddha's teachings, this technology? Can I make any true transformation in my life or not? And the Buddha says that when we have that kind of faith and we put the effort to put it to the test, then the result, the proof of the pudding, if you like, is mindfulness. And if we're establishing mindfulness based correctly upon faith and effort, then that mindfulness will mature into samadhi. And if we're developing a samadhi based upon faith and effort and mindfulness, that samadhi will be the platform for wisdom. These are the 5 spiritual faculties, the five powers of the mind. So the goal of Buddhist practice, liberation, I mean, often I think it doesn't always sound so immediately inspiring. I say, oh, what are you practicing for? So you don't have to be born anymore. And I feel, well, that's a bit kind of miserable goal, you know. Can't you think of anything a little bit more uplifting? But what we're really talking about here is like cessation, seen on the other side of the coin, if you like, is non-arising. And we're talking about the non-arising of dukkha and its causes. So it's not like we're aiming that sometime in the future and after we're enlightened or after we're dead, we're not born again in that sense. I mean, that's not, I'm not denying that or opposing that interpretation. But what really we should be looking at is how not to be reborn today. So how can I live my life and fulfill my responsibilities in such a way that there is no I-making or mind-making. This is called ahankara and mamankara, because as soon as we create this sense of me and mine, at any point, that's whole of samsara arises. It's the fly in the soup. However tasty the soup is, you just need one fly and you've got to throw the whole thing out. And so however we're living our life, as soon as that moment, that there's that grasping, there's that creation, there's that assumption of control and ownership, then samsara appears. And when there's non-arising, then that's what we mean by the deathless, or the no more rebirth. So we're not talking on the macro level here, because that's too much. We can't really understand that. But we can understand on our daily life and how we can reduce rebirth day by day, moment by moment, until it becomes less and less, and hopefully eventually fades away altogether. So I think I've shared the Dhamma with you for sufficient amount of time this evening. Thank you for your patience. Probably been a long day for everyone. And we can end the session now and invite you all to go back and have a good rest. And we'll see each other again tomorrow morning.